Happy New Year, everyone, and welcome to our first full edition of the Sky Tonight program here in 2021. My name is Seth. I'm the curator of astronomy for the Lohmann Planetarium. Glad to be back with you in the new year. And in this episode, we're covering the dates of January 4th through January 10th. What we'll talk about again is the annual Quadratics meteor shower. It has already peaked, but it's still going on through the beginning of January. We'll also talk about the planet Mercury getting close to Jupiter and Saturn, very near the sun, near sunset in the west. And we're going to talk about the entire month of January and some highlights for the month and what to look out for. So let's get to it. For those who are still looking out for a stray Quadratic meteor or two, this is actually the first major meteor shower for the year, and one that actually already peaked on the evening of the 2nd and the morning of the 3rd. And unfortunately this year, the very large waning gibbous moon was actually obscuring our view of the meteor shower, so the light pollution from the moon made it a little tougher. But the Quadratics last until January 12th, so the moon will be a little smaller through the week and a little less vibrant and bright, so that may make it a little bit better if you want to watch out for some of these meteors. And as I mentioned in last week's episode, where to look for the radiant point is underneath the Big Dipper in the northeast. Here's the Big Dipper, where the bowl shape that is pretty well known, and the handle of this large dipper. And if you look underneath the handle, we have this area of the sky where there was a former constellation called Quadrans Muralis, which was actually a wall quadrant named after those astronomical tools from the past that helped us measure angular distances in the sky. This constellation never made the final cut of the official 88 constellations that we use today. These were formed in 1930. So this is named after an old, antiquated constellation, but it's still kind of neat to know where that comes from. And so this is the radiant point where the meteors would radiate from. And this meteor shower, at least with good conditions, can have 40 to 80 meteors per hour. It comes from a rock comet called 2003 EH1, or it's a kind of a special type of asteroid, which is sort of in between an asteroid and a comet. And it leaves behind a debris trail that we're still going through this week. So maybe you'll catch some of the Quadratics at this time of the year, stay up a little bit later, look kind of towards the northeast, but all around the sky, and you may see them streaking overhead. Now, if we fast forward to the end of this week, what we'll have in the west-southwest, very low near the horizon, is the planet Mercury joining the planets Jupiter and Saturn. And if you've been paying attention to Jupiter and Saturn, especially since the winter solstice on the 21st, when they were at their closest, within a tenth of a degree, since then, these two planets have been drifting farther and farther apart from each other and getting closer to the sun. So as we move ahead in time here, and you can see the date and time at the top left there, you'll notice that they're moving away from each other and descending into the sun's glare. So that means they've been getting harder and harder to see as we move into the new year eventually. And as we get into this week, you'll see they're quite low. And then by the end of this week, here on Sunday the 10th, they'll be very, very low, but they'll be joined by the planet Mercury. So just so you know the order here, this is Jupiter, a little bit above. That's Saturn, so that'll be the dimmest. And then Mercury here to the left there. And Mercury never strays too far from the sun because, of course, it is the closest planet to the sun. So it kind of dances around the sun near the horizon, either in the evening or in the morning, depends on where Mercury is in its orbit. And this is kind of a nice scene to see all three planets sort of in the same area of the sky from our perspective. To see this at all, you'd have to have a very clear view of the horizon with no obstructions, no clouds or any bad weather, and you're looking through a lot of the atmosphere because you're looking through the curvature of the atmosphere quite a bit this low. And so it's going to be quite mucky here with the air between your eye and these planets here. So it may make it very tough to see, and you have the sun's glare on top of that. So for most people, you probably won't see this unless you're really lucky and have all the right conditions, and maybe even have some type of device, binoculars or a telescope, to see these three planets in this area of the sky. So it's still worth mentioning because it's great to have these planets so close to each other, but a very difficult thing to observe as these planets descend closer and closer to our sun. And this is just after sunset, probably about an hour after sunset or so, around there, when you have a chance to see this very low in the west-southwestern horizon. Now, taking a look ahead at the month of January, there's a lot of great things to celebrate and to explore. So when it comes to constellations, this month, we're really looking at all those great wintertime constellations. Before we look at those, though, we can really say farewell to the summer triangle towards the west. And this is by about 7 o'clock local time here. So by that time, it has already set. But you can even, at this moment, see the leftover part of the summer triangle, one of the bright stars here called Deneb. Deneb is part of Cygnus the Swan. So that's a summer constellation that you can see for most of the fall and into the beginning of winter time that is now setting in the west. And as we continue to kind of make our way upwards in the sky, above that, more in the northwest now, you can see Cassiopeia, which is a fall constellation there. It looks like a W or a letter M that I will turn on now. And that's the Queen that we've mentioned before. And so she's kind of shifting over more towards the northwestern part of the sky. If we look not far from Cassiopeia, just to the south of her, we'll see her daughter is located here. Not one of the brightest constellations, but it is noticeable if you look carefully enough. So that's Andromeda with the Andromeda galaxy right there. If you're in a dark enough sky, you may see it. And Andromeda is actually connected to another fall constellation that is now more squarely in the west. And it is a square of stars. Here, this is the square of Pegasus that is attached to Andromeda, that flying horse from Greek mythology as well. So those fall constellations have shifted a little bit more to this area. And let's take a look over to the east here, where we can find those prominent winter constellations that have really risen above the eastern horizon, mostly centered around one of the most famous constellations. That, of course, is Orion the Hunter. There's Orion's belt, the 3 stars that go across his waist, his shoulder stars, his legs here. Orion the Hunter is such a great constellation. This is a great time of the year to see these stars and to celebrate this area of the sky here. And in next week's episode, I'm going to talk a lot about Orion, since I think this is the best time of year to look at him, and I'll focus quite a bit on him, his mythology, and the stars and really cool objects inside of him. And all around him, if you're looking in this area towards the east, you can see above him the stars of Taurus the Bull there. Just above his head and more to the north, we see the 2 stars of the Gemini twins, Castor and Pollux. And as I've mentioned previously, this really bright star here, this is Capella, one of the brightest stars in our sky, that forms the oddly shaped constellation called Auriga the Charioteer. And as you stay up a little bit later, you'll start to see Orion's 2 hunting dogs. This is the brightest star Sirius, which is part of Canis Major, and a little bit dimmer but still noticeable, this is the star called Procyon, which is part of his smaller dog known as Canis Minor. So this month, if you stay up later, you will see them rising a little bit higher and higher in the sky. So those are some really great star patterns, constellations that you can see for this month. So we're really getting into those winter constellations and watching those fall and even summertime ones shift to the western part of the sky. Speaking of planets and the moons for this month, actually on the 11th, just after this week's episode, we have something really nice in the early morning with the planet Venus and the moon, the very thin crescent moon, looking towards the east and southeast, very low in the horizon. This is the 11th, so this is Monday morning. Very early in the morning, you'll see the planet Venus, which again is the brightest planet in our sky, and the very thin waning crescent moon, just before it enters into its new moon phase on the 13th. And so that'll be a really nice scene. And for those of us that have a really clear view of the eastern horizon, since here in Daytona we have the beach, so that gives us a really clear view of this area. This is going to be something really nice to see just above that part of the sky. So that could be a good picture or something nice to at least view with this planet and the moon in that orientation. On the 20th, there's a really nice grouping of solar system objects pretty high in the evening sky. And if you notice on this night, this is around 7 o'clock local time here, you'll find the moon will be at first quarter, so it'll be half full, and it'll be very close to the red planet Mars. By this time, Mars is pretty much straight up in the sky, so that's nice. So having these two objects near each other is a pretty interesting scene. But even better, if you have a big telescope, not only could you see Mars, but you may be able to spot the planet Uranus nearby. Uranus is one of those planets you cannot see with your naked eyes. It's just too far away, one of these outer solar system planets. But if you have a big enough telescope, you can pick that up, and it's located here. Again, not too far from the planet Mars, which is an inner solar system planet, so that's quite nice. We'll talk more about this later. So these types of conjunctions aren't as easy to see, but it's nice to know that it's happening, especially if you have a telescope. And as we approach the end of the month, on January 24th, when Jupiter and Saturn are just too close to the sun to be seen at all, the planet Mercury will then have risen high enough above it in its orbit to be seen above the western horizon after sunset. So by this date, on the 24th, Mercury will reach what's called its greatest eastern elongation. So it's most east of the sun, which means it's highest you can see it in the evening sky by about 19 degrees above the sun. So that'll be quite nice to see with the planet Mercury, the smallest and the closest planet to the sun in our solar system. That's it for another edition of our Sky Tonight program. Thanks for tuning in here in the new year. We have a lot to look forward to. And as I always say, come by our Lohmann Planetarium. We're still doing shows safely and every single day. So check us out if you want to see a show if you're in the area in Daytona Beach. But again, hope to see you again here digitally as well. Take care and happy stargazing.